Anyway, so this is, so we'll talk about, it follows on quite nicely from what Steve was talking about yesterday, and then Jean-Sébastien very kindly asked what's the connection between cultural Marxism and the three blessings. So I'll explain that as well. Just some issues around freedom of speech and education. Just to get some idea or some sense of why Marxism is very important to still be studying today. Even though the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the communist regimes all collapsed and fell to pieces, yet still we find that in universities and the world in which we live, Marxism is very prevalent. So this is a typical lecture given by Professor Paul Fry. He's one of the most eminent professors of English literature in the world, in the English-speaking world. And this is a typical lecture he gave, an introduction to literature at Yale University.
As we get into social perspectives on literature and art, you may ask yourself, out of idle curiosity, or perhaps even peevishly, why Marx? Why so much Marx? Why is it Marx who seems to stand behind the idea that the social criticism of art is the best and most relevant way to approach this subject matter? Well, it's because whatever the outcome of Marxist thought may have proven to be historically, it's nevertheless the case to this day that the most devastating critique of existing ideas about things, of states of affairs that, as it were, meander along without too much self-consciousness, remains the Marxist one, together perhaps with the Freudian one. And when...
So that just gives you an example that goes on at universities, college campuses, the humanities throughout the Western world now. The Marxist perspective and view is regarded as being the most profound, the most critical, the most useful, and the most interesting. And it's fine. I studied Marxism when I was at university. It is a very interesting analysis and critique of the world in which we live, but it's only one of many. The problem now is it becomes the dominant one, and people very rarely encounter an alternative, especially a conservative, perspective on the nature of reality. Yeah. So who was Marx? He was a German philosopher, a left-wing Hegelian, not going to go into that. Grandson of Jews, which is really significant. So he himself wasn't Jewish, he was an atheist. His parents converted to Protestantism, they became Lutherans in Germany, because if you wanted to get on in life, you needed to convert and assimilate. But despite the fact that he wasn't a believer in God, and despite the fact that his parents weren't Jewish, he would still experience anti-Semitism, as did many other Jews, because anti-Semitism then is a racial thing. It doesn't matter if you change your religion, you're still a Jew from a racial point of view. And so that's what he encountered. So he experienced a huge amount of social injustice. He experienced a lot of economic injustice, or saw it around where he was living. And he wanted to try and change society and overthrow the existing order. So he inherited this sort of Jewish passion for justice and to change society. The question is, well, how are you going to change society? First of all, you have to analyze what is wrong. So he talked about the problems with society. It's a class society. Rich and poor, rulers and workers. And there's exploitation, and as a result of exploitation, both the capitalists and the workers are all alienated, experience alienation. So the next thing you want to do is, well, what is the cause of these problems? So he said he came up with this vision of a primitive communal society in which everybody's equal, everybody did everything. And then some people started to specialize in fishing or farming or making shoes or whatever. And this specialization then led to the division of labor. And then you needed some people to do the managing, and then the managers became the sort of rulers, and they persuaded people that not only were they good managers and rulers, but actually they owned the property. And so the introduction of private property came along. So the solution then, based upon analysis, is the abolition of private property. So, and the state taking control over state ownership of the economy. He expected this to take place through a violent revolution, but he also recognized the possibility of communists or socialists coming to power through the democratic process and instituting a communist economic program through the democratic process without violent revolution. He also foresaw that the ruling class wouldn't be very happy with this kind of thing, losing their property being expropriated, and so he thought the possibility of maybe having to exterminate them, and then create a new identity, which in the Soviet Union became a Soviet citizen. People no longer were encouraged to think of themselves as Russian or Lithuanian or Kazakh, but as Soviet citizens, and that became the new identity. So we talked yesterday a little bit about, so how can we analyze Marxism then, from a principal point of view? So I talked about our existential reality, what it means to be a human being, these three fundamental dimensions of life, the relationship we have between a mind and body, and we should become a person of integrity. The relationship we exist in relationship with other human beings, and family, the basis of society. And then we live in a physical, natural world where we want to experience, express our creativity and sense of ownership. So we've got these three different dimensions of human existence. So how can we analyze Marxism or communism using this framework of the three blessings? So what is communism? Well, first of all, communism leads to the abolition of the third blessing. So Marx and Engels in their manifesto, they summed the sort of key phrase, they summed up communism. Communism is the abolition of private property. And so with that comes the transfer of all property to the state. And so the state then in a communist society would own all the land, all the factories, all the shops, all the businesses, the houses, the buildings. Everything was owned by the state. The largest thing that a person in the Soviet Union was able to own was their car. And that was it. Everything else was owned by the state. They could use it and pay rent for it. It's owned by the state. And then there was no free market. The free market was abolished, and they created a planned economy guided by the state bureaucrats, and also had the state and party control of the arts, the creative arts. So you weren't allowed to get your poetry published unless you belonged to the Soviet Society of Authors. Anyway, you had to be a member of the party to be able to do anything, or to get anything published, or to get anywhere. You had to be a member of the party. Okay, so what are the implications of this? Well, it means that if the state owns everything, it means it's impossible to become a true owner. You can't become an owner at all. And so if you can't become an owner, then it's impossible then to become a lord of creation. And if you can't become a lord of creation, it's impossible to inherit God's creativity. Because if you rent something, then you don't have the authority to knock it down and to rebuild it. If you rent something, you don't have the authority to redecorate it the way you want it. If you're just renting something, you don't have that authority because you're not the owner. That's why people like to own their own house. They like to own their own car, because then they can shape it and make it the way they want it as an expression of themselves. So people, when you own something, you can express your creativity through that thing that you own. Does that make sense? So with communism, with the abolition of private property then, the abolition of the possibility of ownership, and therefore the possibility of living a creative life. And so that's why a lot of scientists then, and brilliant people in the Soviet Union, that went into maths. Because to do maths, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't need vast resources. So that's communism 1. Communism 2, it's the abolition of the second blessing, the impossibility of establishing the second blessing. So this is from Alexandra Collins. She was the first woman's commissar of the Bolshevik of the Soviet Union. I think she's Polish, actually. So writing about this and writing about the family, she said the worker state will come to replace the family. So instead of being a God-centered family, the state then will replace the family. in terms of people's sense of identity, now a citizen of the state, as opposed to these are my parents, this is my family. The obligation of parents to their children will wither away gradually until finally society assumes a full responsibility. So traditionally then, parents are responsible for the socialization of their children, for teaching them, for their welfare, for their education, for their health, for, all these things were normally, these are responsibilities that fall to the parents within the family. And so she's saying, well, as the state expands and occupies this space, and civil society then is squeezed out, the state then will come to take over all these responsibilities, education, welfare, health, etc., that would normally have been fulfilled by the parents. Their marriage, she said, has given way to the free and honest union of men and women who are lovers and comrades. So certainly there were, and there still are, problems within marriage, often very patriarchal, but that was their vision the first few years in the Soviet Union. There was no, you couldn't actually get married in the sense there was no official legal formula that you could go through and end up with a marriage certificate, because there was that vision of just free and honest union of men and women who are lovers and comrades, as she said. I knew somebody who suffered immensely because of that situation. So the state then takes over the law, the state takes over education, the nationalization of all schools, the nationalization of the curriculum, the determination of what is taught on the timetable. Marxism, Leninism goes in, you have pictures of Lenin all over the classrooms. It takes over health, all the hospitals, the medical supply services are all nationalized, taken over by the state, and there's no possibility of going to have some alternative. If you didn't like going to the state school, well, there was no alternative. There was no independent education, there was no homeschooling, you just had to go there. And through the schools then, the state would socialize people into developing this Soviet identity, and believing in Marxism, Leninism. And the state then would take over the whole of civil society. So you couldn't even establish a chess club without getting official permission, and the Communist Party being the leading organ within every single association. Everything then became politicized in that sense. So there's no freedom. A free society is, you want to start a chess club, you just do it. In a non-free society, you want to start a chess club, you have to get permission from the state or from some bureaucrat, and then a stamp of approval. Yes, you can establish a chess club, but we want to have a representative on your board of, directors or whatever. What is Communism 3? I'm whizzing through all this terribly quickly. It's the abolition of the first blessing.
Oh my God, all of that.
So Lenin said, atheism is the natural and inseparable part of Marxism, of the theory and practice of scientific socialism. So the first blessing is about mind-body unity, becoming the incarnation, the dwelling place of God, becoming a person of integrity. So if you're a Christian then obviously it's incompatible with living in a communist society. As Bukharin, who's the first ideologist of the Soviet Union, said, communism is incompatible with religious faith. And then Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, in our country the lie has become not just a moral category but a pillar of the state. So you might wonder, well, how does that work? So if you're not allowed to believe in God, you're not allowed to teach your children about God, then when you meet a policeman or somebody and they say, where are you going? Or do you believe in God? What are you going to say? No. So that means you have to lie. So you have a choice then between either telling the truth, getting arrested, being put in prison, and maybe going to serve for 25 years in the Gulag, or telling a lie. So if you tell a lie, that means there's a difference between what you think and what you say and what you do. There's a disunity between mind and body. So that's what Solzhenitsyn meant. The lie is a pillar of the state. In other words, you cannot live in a communist society without telling lies, unless you don't mind being arrested and your children taken into care and you yourself going off to prison. That's the way it was. If you believed in God, you were not allowed to go to university. If you believed in God, you're not allowed to become a school teacher. A whole range of things which are just removed. So there's no freedom of speech or freedom of religion. If you said things which are politically incorrect, you'd be arrested, you would be interrogated, and you could be sent to prison. And so if we look at this, the persecution and suppression of religion, in Russia in 1941, there were only 500 churches that were still open. Before the revolution, there were 54,000 churches. There were 54,000 churches. During that period of time, thousands, tens of thousands were destroyed, were demolished, all the other ones were closed. They were turned into warehouses, and a few of them were turned into museums. So the impossibility then, and then along with that, the imposition of a new identity. You are a Soviet citizen, as opposed to I'm a son of God or I'm a daughter of God. That make sense? So that's what communism is. It makes the impossibility of being able to realize the three blessings. So I got very interested in this when I was 13. When I was 13, I went on the very first tourist trip, very first tourist visit, or what do you call it, a tourist visit? Party that ever went to the Soviet Union. Up until then, there were no tourists were allowed to go. Then in 1970, they decided to open up a little bit, and so they allowed one cruise ship to stop full of school children. They thought that was manageable. So I happened to be able to go on that, went through the Baltics, went to Leningrad, went down to Moscow, and it made a very profound impression on me. Everything was so grey, so oppressive, couldn't take photographs of things that were interesting. There were policemen all over the place and goose-stepping. There's nothing worth buying in the shops. You couldn't ask the questions from the in-tourist guide that you would like to ask. And then it's taken to Red Square, lined up. It's a great privilege, actually. We didn't have to line up. We were taken to the head of the queue to go into the mausoleum. And inside there, we saw this waxwork, this mummified head and body of Lenin. And I thought, well, why would people want to line up for hours and hours to come in and look at the mummified body of Lenin? Anyway, so that was the way it was. So it really made a very profound impression on me. So when I went back home to England, I started to look into this. When I understood what was going on, it radically changed my life, and I felt I have a moral imperative to go there and to do something about this. When I found out there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in labor camps at that time. And I felt, how can I live here while that is going on? So I felt a moral imperative to dedicate my life to the overthrow of communism. So as a little schoolboy, 15 years old, I imagined becoming James Bond. Anyway, I learnt Russian. So that was...
James Bond existed at the time?
Yeah, of course. James Bond is forever. Don't just only live twice, you live over and over again. And so that was it. So that's why I became very interested in this whole area. So what is communist ideology? Just very briefly, it's a whole philosophical system, and dialectical materialism. It says that only matter exists, which means there is no God, there is no soul, there is no spirit, which of course is very problematic, trying to explain, well, what is consciousness if only matter exists? So there are huge problems with materialism. And also said progress is based upon the dialectical conflict between thesis and antithesis. I'm not going to go into any of this. And then apply to social development and the historical process, this idea of historical materialism, the productive forces, what kind of level of machinery and productive forces you have. This determines the economic relationships between the people working in the economy, and that determines the nature of society. And he said progress takes place through class struggle, and he justified then the possibility of a violent revolution. And he predicted that this revolution would actually take place in the advanced capitalist countries, which at that time were Western Europe and also America. Anyway, so let's see what happened. The communist development. In 1917, though, it started off. Revolution then, Russia, Soviet Union spreading there. Then into Eastern Europe after the Second World War. Then into China, Korea, and then later on down into Africa, it's Angola, That's Somaliland. And then after 1989 it rolled back until it's basically just now North Korea, Cuba, and China is nominally communist, not really nationalist. Any questions? JS?
So it was mainly the countries who had in their constitution that based on Marxism-Leninism, it excludes the alliance.
Excludes who?
The allies of the Soviets or China.
They were all...
The map that we saw.
Yes, those countries, they had communist revolutions, and communists came to power, and they claimed that they were communist parties, and they reorganized the economy. Everything's taken over by the state, and the Communist Party managed everything. And religious people, generally speaking, were persecuted, and many of them were put to death.
So the map didn't count the allies.
Allies, like
Allies.
friends.
Friends of communist countries?
Yeah.
There were friends, and usually they were socialist countries, like Venezuela, for example.
Because we don't see Egypt, so it's
Well,
just a country
that's right, who became communist. Egypt wasn't communist. It was it was allied for various political reasons, yeah, so was Syria. They were socialist, but they weren't communist. So what was the human cost of communism? These are sort of the figures. It was horrendous. And if you want to read about it, everyone should read this book. I read this book when I was a teenager. It's very profoundly moving, extraordinary, about what went on in the ordinary lives of people who just for no reason at all sometimes were arrested, were sentenced to 15, 25 years of working in a labor camp. And this one here is the most extraordinary book I read a couple of years ago about what was it like for everyday life living in a communist society. It was really how it works. And if you don't want to read books, there's only a few films around. This one here is about the killing fields, communism in Cambodia. Well worth watching. And this one here is about some of the things that took place in Poland. Again, well worth watching. It's very striking that there are many, many books written about the evils of Nazism, fascism. There are many films about the evils of Nazism, fascism, justifiably so. But you find very, very few films exposing the evils that take place under communism and under socialism.
Have you come across Stalin's children book?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a lovely book, but very sad, very... I'm also very interested in that.
Yeah, they should read that book, The Whisperers. It's extraordinary. It's based upon the diaries and the letters of... I cried so many tears reading that book, you know, the betrayal and all the things that took place. It was just awful. So basically then, communism is every bit as evil as fascism, and although you find Nazism and fascism continually condemned, very rarely do you find anybody condemning communism. So for example, the 100th anniversary in 2017, the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, then the BBC and lots of media programs did articles about it, and it was all treated very, very sympathetically. And I remember listening to an interview on the BBC of the grandson of Trotsky, asking, how was your grandfather? And without any reference whatsoever to the terrible evils that actually existed and were caused by someone like Leon Trotsky. So the whole thing was treated as a commemoration. Now, can you imagine 100 years after, when did Hitler come to power, 1933 or something? Can you imagine in a few years' time, 100 years after Hitler came to power, BBC and other media outlets commemorating the rise of Hitler and ignoring all the things like the Holocaust and everything that happened. Can you imagine that? Well, that's the way communism is treated by the liberal left media elite within our country. Anyway, so does communism work? No. First of all, none of his predictions came true. So, communists didn't come to power in advanced capitalist countries, but only in very poor countries. the poorest capitalist countries and also feudal countries. Also, people didn't identify themselves as Soviet men and women. As soon as the Soviet Union broke up, nobody thought of themselves as being a Soviet citizen. They all thought of themselves as being Russians or Georgians or Armenians or something else. And you had the re-emergence, as I said, of national identities. The economy itself stagnated, and communism then doesn't work from an economic point of view. You might wonder why. Why can't communism work? Well, first of all, in order to plan an economy, which is the communist economy, you have to make plans. But actually it's impossible to plan, an impossibility of a planned economy. So the reason is because there's no price mechanism. So the price mechanism, it indicates about supply and demand, shortages and excesses. The billions and billions of calculations are needed to make these kind of predictions and make these kind of plans. And as soon as you make a plan, then you've got all the feedback loops that come along. So someone called von Mises, Ludwig von Mises, he talked about the impossibility of being able to make the necessary calculations to be able to have a planned economy. How do you know how many pairs of women's shoes of size 5 of a particular style to make? You don't know that. Where's that knowledge, information going to come from? You're going to go around surveying all the women and saying what kind of shoe would you like and what kind of feet have you got, and you collect all the information and you put it all into a computer, and by the time the answers come out, the fashions have changed and the feet have grown. It doesn't work. It's impossible. That's just a very simple example. And so Hayek then, he said this, he talked about this, saying that not only is it a calculation problem, but no one has the knowledge required to make the necessary calculations, even if it were possible. So the role of the market then, for Hayek, is primarily epistemic. It's knowledge, about knowledge. It's a device for transmitting, generating information that's otherwise distributed throughout society. Knowledge of the economy is mainly local knowledge of fleeting economic environments. It's often embodied in skills or an entrepreneurial insight and a sensitivity for kairos, the propitious and non-recurring moment for action. Little of it is propositional or factual. If a businessman is going to make a decision, he makes it today. He doesn't input the information into a computer, going through some kind of central computer and then finally getting the answer a few days later, by which time the opportunity to go and buy those strawberries has passed because they've all turned into mush. The price mechanism is thus the way the information is communicated. To know there's a shortage of a particular good, one does not have to know the whole circumstances of the industry, its suppliers and labor problems. One only has to look at the price. So the price mechanism is extremely sensitive, and price is thus knowledge. The price then is very valuable, and that's why people are so concerned that the stock market, interest rates, nobody should be interfering in that, because that's the most valuable knowledge in the entire economy, is what is the price of a share, etc., etc. When they're determined by the market, then they're incredibly accurate. When somebody comes along and tries to interfere in the market and fix the price of a share or fix the price of something, then it's no longer knowledge, it's just a false piece of information. So then someone called Michael Polanyi, he was an Hungarian polymath, he said, well, not only is an information... Oh, it's you, all right. Not only that, he said, all knowledge is tacit knowledge. So a lot of the knowledge that you need is not explicit knowledge. It's not knowledge that you can put into a computer. It's not knowledge you can write down. It's knowledge which you just know inside yourself. An example is, how do you know how to drive a car? If you memorize a driving manual, does that mean you know how to drive a car? No, you have to practice. Where's the knowledge to drive a car? It's all stored in your muscles and in your reflexes. That's where the knowledge is, it's tacit knowledge. And so he said, a lot of the information then, a lot of the knowledge for the economy is tacit knowledge. It's not actually knowledge that you can put into a computer. How does a farmer know when to harvest the grain, bring the harvest? He feels what it's like. Based upon years of experience, he just knows the weather, the ground, the moisture level, everything he just senses today or tomorrow we're going to bring in the harvest. And so finally, someone called G.S. Shackle, he said, the future is unknowable and therefore the knowledge for planning does not exist. Even if we had all the knowledge, We can't plan for the future because the future is inherently unknowable. We don't know what the weather's going to be like next week, let alone in 5 years' time. We don't know whether there's going to be an earthquake or a tsunami or a volcano is suddenly going to emerge, or there's going to be this or that. These are things that are unknowable. So you can't actually plan for the unknowable. So if you make a plan based upon deciding what the weather's going to be like and what this is going to be like, and we're going to take into account the fact there is going to be a tsunami there in 5 years' time, and we're going to input all that, we'll make a plan. But if all these natural events don't take place, how's the plan work? Just like the internet. When IBM first made these desktop computers, I think they thought there'd be a market for about, how many? About 1,000 in the world. When the World Wide Web started, nobody could imagine how it's going to turn out. So these are things which you don't know the future, so you can't actually plan the economy because you don't know what things are going to be invented in the future which are going to actually transform everything. That makes sense? So that's why communism is impossible. The future's not fixed. The future's open. Communism is based upon the idea that there's fate, determinism, the future is fixed, and therefore we can make plans, but actually the future is inherently open and unpredictable. Anyway, so communism then, it collapsed because it doesn't work, and then you might wonder what happened next in after 1989. This is a professor of economics from America, talked about this.
You know, with the worldwide collapse of socialism in the late 80s and early 90s, the Marxist left did not just throw in the towel. I remember at the time I was at the University of Tennessee, there was a Marxist economist on the faculty, and I ran into him in the parking lot, right in the middle of all this happening, with Boris Yeltsin bombing the Russian parliament and things like that. And I said, John, what are you going to do now? Bricklayer? Carpenter? You know, what's the future for you? And he said, oh, no, we're stronger than ever now because we're no longer associated with all these bad guys, Ceausescu and Stalin and all that. And so after all this, the Marxist left took two different routes. You know, they didn't give up. One is they paid attention to the socialist economist Robert Heilbronner, who wrote an article in the New Yorker magazine in 1990, I think it was October 1990, in which he said, yeah, socialism, Mises was right. One of the articles he wrote was actually called, the title was Mises was right about socialism. And so you would think that meant give up on socialism, but no. He said we need to work harder at it, you know, because it always was about totalitarian control. It never was about helping the poor, helping the laboring class, or anything like that. So it was always about control. And so how do we reassert our control over people's lives? He said, well, you know, socialism was always sold in the name of helping the people. And he essentially said, people schmeeple, the hell with the people. We're for the bugs and the ants and the snakes and all that stuff, the planet. So let's sell socialism now in the name of saving the planet. And so hence the watermelons were born. Watermelons are green on the outside, red on the inside. And so there's a branch of the Marxist left that all became environmentalists all of a sudden. And they're promoting basically centrally planned economies under socialism under the guise of saving the planet. The other branch became cultural Marxists. They gave up on the old class struggle between the working class and the capitalist class, and they invented some new classes. There's the oppressor class and the oppressed class. The oppressors are white heterosexual males, and the oppressed class is everybody else, pretty much. You know, the whole victim thing. And so that's a good way to eliminate dissent and exert totalitarian control over society.
Okay, so you got these two routes going environmentalism. A lot of them did. I remember that at the time. That's what's been going on in central London. You know, what was it called? Extinction Rebellion, wanting to close down the economy, close down everything. There are obviously problems with the environment, huge problems, But their motivation, the reason why they're doing what they're doing, is to close down the capitalist economy. They're very like the anti-globalist people. They're all the same. It's very much about that. And restrict the ownership of property, so the state becomes involved in regulating more and more and controlling everything. And because these are the people that are involved, it means they're the ones who are controlling things and taking control. So basically it's aimed at the destruction of the Western economic model. Personally, I'm concerned about the bugs. I am concerned about the bugs. One of
I think
the bugs.
The aim was slightly different. Their aim was to make the government recognize that it is an emergency.
Yeah,
and they still need more funding.
yeah, but government has recognized that for many years and it is doing something. And there's a lot of carbon, I mean, you know, all the light bulbs are changing, all these things are changing. So they're too young to know all the things that have developed over the last 20 years in terms of addressing these problems. It's not that the government's not doing anything. The government's doing a huge amount, they just are completely unaware of it. And so their motivation is really about the government regulating, doing more and more and more. So when the government does more and more and more, it means the government takes over the economy, which is basically what they want to happen. Personally, I'm concerned about bugs. I remember
What do you mean by bugs? Bees?
insects.
Yes, but
No,
in what way are you concerned?
Well, I remember in the past, when you drive along through the countryside, then after a day of driving the countryside, your windscreen was covered with insects. Now you can drive in the countryside for hours and hours and hours without not even a fly being stuck to your windscreen. It's been the genocide or the complete decimation of the whole insect population within the UK and other parts of Europe. And if the insects all go, then that's going to affect pollination, it's going to affect the birds, everything. But so nobody's concerned about the insects. They're only concerned about carbon dioxide, which is irrelevant in many ways compared to the loss of this whole category called insects.
Oh, I see. I know now what you
But they're not talking about that. Anyway,
As well.
sorry?
The whole other ecosystems are being lost as well.
Well, yeah, the whole ecosystem disappearing, but nobody goes on demonstrations complaining about save the insects. Because that is very doable. A lot of it's connected. There's very little research goes into that, but it's incredibly important. But it's not about controlling the economy. So that's why they're basically not interested.
Do you like mosquitoes?
I don't mind. Well,
Come to Bologna.
anyway, Clive had a question.
I don't like mosquitoes.
It seems very similar to what happened with CND when we were younger, the campaign for nuclear disarmament. It's hijacking the best intentions of good people with an underlying agenda.
Yeah.
That's very much what's happening.
Yeah, they're all very nice people, very idealistic. The idealistic people are the ones who cause the most misery and destruction in human history. Personally, I don't like idealists. Communists are idealists, fascists are idealists. I don't like idealists because they want to go and impose their ideal upon me and upon everybody else, as opposed to letting people pursue their own ideals. They have an ideal, which means a right way that everyone should live, and try to impose that ideal upon everybody.
Latin America is full of them.
Yes, I know. Well, idealists are much more dangerous than serial killers. Really.
Good job,
It is. Okay, so that's one aspect. I'm not going to go into that. And also into cultural Marxism he mentioned. So there's a rise of a whole thing called identity politics, gender politics, gay rights, marriage, gender fluidity, a lot of the things Stephen was talking about yesterday, which leads towards the abolition of marriage and the family. And then we have other aspects which talk about a bit more limitations on freedom of speech, marginalization of religion, corruption of education, abolition of the first blessing. So still, the goal is still the same as it was under the communists and Soviet Union. It's just going about it in a different way, that's all. So where did all these ideas come from? They basically came from something called the Frankfurt School. If you go to college or university these days, you'll probably come across the Frankfurt School in the 1920s and 30s. Every single one of these people were Jewish, except for the last one, Jürgen Habermas, who's still alive. They were all atheists, except Walter Benjamin, who believed in God. They were all atheists, but they were still categorized as being Jews. And so in terms of the origins of the Frankfurt School, the initial idea of an independently founded institute was conceived to provide for studies on the labor movement, so they were socialists, Marxists, and the origins of anti-Semitism, which at that time were being ignored in German intellectual and academic life. So they were all, as I said, they're atheists like Marx, but they still experienced anti-Semitism. And a lot of Jews a lot of people didn't even realize that they were Jewish. I remember there's one professor of law. One day the Nazi came and they arrested him, and in his university office, and he said, what have I done wrong? You're Jewish. I'm not Jewish. My parents are Christian. I was brought up a Christian. I've always gone to church. What do you mean I'm Jewish? Didn't you know you had a Jewish grandmother? No? Well, that means you're Jewish. And he was taken off to a labor camp and he was gassed. That's the way it was. So, a lot of Jewish people then were very concerned. Why is there so much anti-Semitism in the whole of German life, intellectual life, and they wanted to study that.
That's how Swedes do, even now.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do. So, partly is this response to this social and economic justice, and also to the Jewish question. I'm not going to talk about this, the origins of Christian anti-Semitism, and which created the environment for anti-Judaism and made the Holocaust possible. And then that's the racial anti-Semitism. As I said, you can't even stop being a Jew. And so these people, members of Frankfurt School, they could see what was going on, the rise of the Nazi Party and coming to power, and they read the ruins, and they moved to America, and they moved into the academy in America. So you might wonder, well, who should have been, yes?
But just before the beginning of the Second World War, the Americans stopped to accept the Jewish.
Yeah, because that's right. I'll mention that in a moment. Yeah. And so who should have been addressing this problem? The Christian churches. But the reality is not a single Christian church on the continent of Europe spoke out against anti-Semitism or against the extermination of the Jews. Not a single institutional church.
My community.
Yeah, but in Colombia.
No, my community here, in Surrey, where I live.
Oh, no, I'm saying on the continent of Europe.
Oh, no, I live in Surrey. Surrey is Europe.
The continent of Europe.
Oh, I see.
Not a single institutional church on the...
England, Britain was European.
I'm talking about geography, the continent of Europe. Not a single institutional church on the continent of Europe spoke out about that issue. This is a huge failure, actually, a huge stain on European Christianity. It is true, if you want to bring in Britain, that the institutional churches in Britain did, and they established the Council of Christians and Jews in 1942, saying that they would not allow to happen to Jews living in Britain what was happening to Jews living on the continent. So this is a disaster, and the churches should have been challenging all this injustice. It shouldn't have been left to Marxists and socialists. The churches should have challenged anti-Semitism. The churches should have challenged racism. All these things, social and economic injustice, should have been challenged and corrected by the institutional churches and by ordinary Christians. The ordinary Christians saved the lives of Jews at the risk of their life, but not a single institution spoke out about it. And again, in America, white churches should have challenged racism. So what happened then is, and so they went off to America, and one of the most prominent, Adorno, he's very interested in why Nazi soldiers are so willing to persecute and kill members of minority groups such as Jews. Could it be blamed on a personality trait? Okay, so when the Frankfurt School, when they went to America, they found that Americans are just as anti-Semitic as Europeans, and it was a huge shock. And then, as Jay has mentioned, there were Jews emigrating to America, but the Americans are just as anti-Semitic as anybody else, and so they put a stop to emigration to America. There were some really shocking things that went on about that, sending Jews back to Europe. Okay, there was one cruise ship that was chartered by a Jewish group, and they all bought tickets, and they all chartered the whole ship, and they etc. And they packed it, and they set off from Hamburg, I think, and they hoped to go and settle in Cuba. The Cubans wouldn't let them land. They went around Central America trying to find somewhere to land. The Americans wouldn't let them land, so they ended up having to go all the way back to Hamburg, and then a lot of them just went to the camps. Loads of stuff like this. Britain also closed the doors. Most countries around the world close the doors. It's shocking. It's a stain upon our culture and our civilization. It's like the old story. God said to Cain, "Where's your brother?" Cain said, "I'm my brother's keeper. Am I responsible for the welfare of my brother?" And that basically was the attitude of the Christian churches. Are we responsible for what happens to the Jews? They're not Christians, so why should we care? It's awful. Shocking, actually. It's not long ago. It's a living memory. And so when these people from the Frankfurt School, they arrived in America, they found the same sort of stuff that was going on, and they didn't want the same fate to befall them in America as was befalling all their family and community back in Europe. And so they started doing a study. And so Adorno, he claimed a particular personality trait is likely to obey authority. So this is one of the things, that SS guards were asked, why did you do it? I was just following orders. In other words, I'm not responsible for my actions. I was just doing as I was told. So he wanted to understand why is it that certain people just do that. And that's why you have these experiments. The experiments with turning up the electricity and giving people shocks. Okay, so these are Jews who want to understand why does this happen. Yeah, all these psychologists, all Jewish people, trying to make sense of this horrendous thing that happened to their community.
But what's wrong with being Jewish?
Nothing.
Okay.
Oh, you want to know what's wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll explain to you what's wrong with being Jewish.
So maybe some people who are
No, okay, it's a good.
Jewish and gave up.
Okay, no, it's a very good question. I'll tell you what's wrong with being a Jew. I'm a Jew, so I can say it.
You think so?
That's right. That's very good. Thank you for that.
I'm a Jew, so I can say that.
My mother's Jewish. My mother's born in Jerusalem.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Nothing. Okay, I'll explain to you what the problem is. Okay, the Christian churches have this what's called the teaching of contempt. Christians for 2,000 years have been taught to have contempt for Jews from the pulpit, and you might wonder why. So there's the accusation for 2,000 years, the Christian accusation the Jews rejected and murdered Jesus.
Which is not true.
Which is not true, but that's the standard understanding. You read the Gospels, and you listen to the pulpit, or you go to Sunday school, and all children are taught by Christians the Jews rejected Jesus. It's Jesus arguing with the rabbis, Jesus arguing with the priests. It's always Jesus against all these Jewish people. In the Gospel of John it says the Jews confronted Jesus. So the impression that's given by Christians is Jesus wasn't a Jew. Okay? Certainly his mother wasn't Jewish. The impression is Jesus was a Christian, and all the others were Jews who disagreed with him, they rejected him, and they eventually murdered him. Okay, so this then creates a sense of, well, the Jews rejected their Messiah, therefore they failed, therefore they should be punished, therefore they should be treated with contempt. They should try and convert Jews to become Christians. If they don't accept Jesus, who is their Messiah, then obviously they're failing. They're morally degenerate. But on the other hand, because they failed, then they ought to be cursed and punished by God. But the reality is that Jewish people were very successful. And so, this became a problem because they're not fitting the lifestyle they're supposed to fit. And so you had, from the time of Constantine the Great, a huge amount of legislation passed against Jews, weren't allowed to do this, weren't allowed to do that, weren't allowed to join these guilds or these professions, and the only thing they were allowed to do essentially was to be involved in finance, because they were allowed to lend money for interest. So the Catholic Church forbade usury, which meant that Catholics were not allowed to lend money and get interest back. So this particular industry that Christians weren't allowed to participate in, Jews were allowed to participate in, and that's why they're often associated banking with money, not because that's what they chose to do, that's the only thing they were allowed to do. And so that's what happened. And then, of course, and they had a lot of envy. And then after the French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and then Napoleon, swept over Europe, and then he opened the ghettos, legislation was changed, Jews were finally allowed to go to university, they were allowed to enter the professions, they were allowed to go become doctors and all sorts of things, lawyers, they were allowed to start their own businesses, they were allowed to own property, which in many parts of Europe they weren't allowed to up until this point. And because of their education was so good, then very quickly they got to the top of all the professions, culture, humanities, science, business, finance, and everything. And this aroused a huge amount of envy. So you had a whole mixture of stuff going on here. They failed, they killed Jesus, they should be punished, they're incredibly successful and not supposed to be, a lot of envy, etc., etc. And you find, people justifying what happened to the Holocaust. Well, if they weren't so arrogant, then people wouldn't have got so upset with them, all sorts of justifications. So that's created this environment to make anti-Judaism and the Holocaust possible. It's all to do with what happened in the early church, the crucifixion of Jesus. And you need to understand why the Christian church blamed the Jews for the rejection. Well, they accused the Jews of rejecting and crucifying Jesus. The reality is that Jesus wasn't rejected by the Jewish people. If he had been rejected, he would have stood in Hyde Park on a street corner preaching, and nobody would have paid any attention to him, and he would have been treated as a madman. The actual reality when you read the Gospels is that Jesus was incredibly well received, not just by ordinary people, but also by a lot of religious leaders. And because he was so successful, he was perceived to be a threat by the political establishment. So when he came into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, then he was proclaimed as a king of Israel. Yeah.
So he was accepted?
He was accepted. If he hadn't been accepted, he would not have been put to death. Because he was so popular and so well accepted, he was seen to be a threat by the political religious establishment, authorities, by the high priest saw him as a political threat, and Romans saw him as a political threat. That was why he was arrested, and that's why he was put to death on a political charge. Above the crucifix is put the sign, the King of the Jews. So he was accused of being someone who's trying to lead a political uprising to overthrow the Roman rule.
So what happened to the group of the Jewish that did not accept Jesus and still don't?
Okay, so then you had, after the crucifixion happened, and then there's a resurrection, which is Easter Sunday, which is today. Christ has risen, and then a lot of Jews then who believed in Jesus, they had a personal encounter with the risen Christ.
Yes.
Thousands of them. And this became the core of what began to be, later on, evolved to become the Christian church. So if he'd been rejected by the Jewish people, his contemporaries, there would be no Christian church. For the first couple of 100 years, all the leaders of the Christian church were all Jews who accepted Jesus. They were Jews who believed in Jesus. And so you had two groups. You had the Jews who believed in Jesus and the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus. And the Jews who believed in Jesus were trying to persuade the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus that Jesus was the Messiah. But then, of course, the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus said he can't be the Messiah because he was put to death. The Messiah is supposed to bring world peace. He was put to death, so he can't be the Messiah. And then the Jews who did believe in Jesus, they tried to persuade the other Jews that Jesus was the Messiah even though he was put to death. And so they got all these verses from Isaiah, which you can find in the New Testament, to prove that everything that happened to Jesus was to fulfill a prophecy. And so they said, well, actually, not only is he the Messiah even though he was put to death, actually he was supposed to be put to death so there could be the resurrection and the forgiveness of sin. So there's a big argument by Jews who believed in Jesus trying to persuade the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus that Jesus is the Messiah. And then you go on a little bit, and then you get... And so, the Jews who did believe in Jesus accused the other Jews, why don't you accept Jesus? This is many years after the crucifixion and resurrection. Why don't you accept Jesus? Why are you rejecting Jesus? And so this developed within this community of the Jews who accepted Jesus a sense that the other Jews are rejecting the Messiah. And then that was projected back into the past. Yeah? And then the Jews who believed in Jesus no longer thought of themselves as Jews, they now thought of themselves as Christians. Yeah? But they were Jews, they just no longer thought of themselves as Jews. They were now. So if you go to the church, you find that the church format of worship is based upon the synagogue. And so that's what happened. And then you had the early church then going into the Roman Empire preaching, but then they were getting persecuted. And it's very problematic that Jesus was put to death by the Romans on a political charge. And so what they had to do, or what they decided to do, is they decided to transfer the blame for the crucifixion of Jesus from the Jews from the Romans onto the Jews. And so that's why the Jews then were, even though it's contrary to what's written in the Gospel, the Jews were accused of rejecting and actually killing Jesus, even though it was the Romans who executed him on a political charge. So then it was much easier for them to witness within the Roman Empire, and Romans felt comfortable to become Christians because Jesus then was no longer associated with a group of people who were trying to overthrow Roman authority. And then all this political dimension of the Messianic mission was extracted, and believing in Jesus and salvation only became about personal transformation of being born again so you can go to heaven in the next world, whereas the Messianic vision of a Messiah is actually about peace and justice and transforming the world. Yeah? So that whole political and social dimension of the Messianic vision was removed, and it just became entirely a personal salvation, believing in forgiveness of sin and that sort of thing. Does that make sense? Anyway, I didn't expect to talk.
You're definitely smart enough to be.
Thank you. No, I didn't expect to talk about that. It's really important. This is one of the most important issues in the world today. Because, again, the rise of anti-Semitism just after the Holocaust is kind of surprising. And this affects education as well, because, I mean...
Yeah, I thank you, William. It's really good that you're talking about this. It's really interesting. I mean, in a certain sense, when it's a highly complex thing because of this tension in the region around Israel and the land issues and all these other issues and the complex issues there, and trying to deal with two very different cultures that have a different faith book. The Torah and the Old Testament and the Quran, and the way I perceive this is a battle. Fundamentally, it's about whether we're a monogamous marriage culture.
I don't want to talk about that because I just want to focus on this. I don't want to go back into Palestine and Israel and everything. I mean, that's just a whole nother thing. It's particularly understanding the origins of the Frankfurt School. I'm only interested in this very narrow sense. Okay, so you have Adorno then coming along, trying to analyze why are my family and my friends and my community being sent to gas chambers in Europe. How can we prevent this from happening in America? So he wrote a book, The Authoritarian Personality, and he said, I mean, he's supposed to be a sociologist. Actually, his sociology is very poor, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, just speculated, made a lot of stuff up. Anyway, this is his, based upon Sigmund Freud's idea that the adult personality is determined by childhood experience. He said the harsh and punitive upbringing in families that he saw in America, there's little love and a lot of punishment. So he said this leads to two kinds of children, one that are afraid of their parents, and so they become excessively respectful of authority figures, and so when they're told to shoot somebody, they do. And then there's some other people, they end up hating their parents because their lack of love and a lot of punishment, and so they end up displacing that hatred onto minorities that can't displaced onto others. And so the Jews then become a scapegoat. It's very easy to attack America. I remember during the 70s and 80s, people were continually demonstrating and attacking America's CND, but they wouldn't attack the Soviet Union because everybody knew if you attack the Soviet Union, you're dead. You can say what you like about America and nothing happens to you. So this is a book here, The Authoritarian Personality. As you can see here, it's published by the American Jewish Committee. And you get other people, prominent people here, writing these sorts of things as well. Eric Fromm and others. So he talked about certain factors associated with the authoritarian personality: parenthood, pride in the family, Christianity, traditional gender roles, patriotism, love of country. And so he developed this whole critical theory to criticize and critique parenthood, pride in the family, Christianity, gender roles, all these things, and to critique and to subvert all of these things. And so that's why in America, for example, a lot of Jewish people, lawyers, went into the civil, what do you call it, union? I don't know.
Oh, the ACLU.
ACLU, very strict separation of church and state. You might wonder why. Well, they experienced a lack of a separation of church and state in Europe, and what the Christians controlling did. Okay, so they wanted to separate all these things, get prayer out of the classroom, all these sorts of things, because of their historical experience in Europe. So you have to say, at the end of the day, they were right, based upon their experience. If they hadn't been through that horrendous and traumatic experience in Europe and the way they were treated by the church, they would not have reacted like that, and they wouldn't have tried to subvert and undermine the whole order, which they saw as a source of all the problems that they were experiencing as a community. And the responsibility for that lies very firmly with the Christian churches, who shouldn't have allowed that kind of injustice to take place. Anyway, so this is what's going on in the 50s and the 60s in America, and their ideas became very, very popular, they're very radical, and then you had a huge amount of student unrest. You're going to find this really interesting, and see what's going on in Paris 45 years ago.
You were not born.
No, okay. No, don't want that one. So, yeah.
The Columbia strike may have reminded people of the Paris Commune, but May '68 in France was the real thing. What began as a student protest, reform of the archaic French university system, sparked a general strike that...
They were anarchists, most of them. That was the spirit. The slogan was all power to the imagination. That you can do anything. You know, we don't have to live with all the various forms of repression, which we're used to. So it was anti-capitalist, but that was just part of this general, complete sort of cultural revolution that the French students were anticipating. And so it's interesting that although they were the furthest out in any way politically, that was also the one place where workers joined with students and almost toppled the government.
May 10th, the night of the barricades, 20,000 students marched in the Latin Quarter. Police and students clashed. Street fighting went on for weeks. The rioting and marches of up to 500,000 people frightened not only President de Gaulle, but the French Communist Party as well. The old left thought this new left was out of control. They had impossible dreams. The two principles...
Okay. That was the sort of thing that was going on, and this transformed and changed the whole scene, what went on. And again, they had legitimate complaints. The French education system was authoritarian, it was backward, etc., etc. And so again, who should have been solving those problems? It shouldn't have been left to the kids and the Marxists. It should have been sensible Christians within the system said we need to reform things. Yeah? Because that reform didn't take place by the able side, then it's the other side that got involved. And so then you have this person from the Frankfurt School called Herbert Marcuse, who's a little interview here from 1977.
The economic convulsions that racked Western societies between the two world wars were seen at the time by most Marxists as being the breakdown of the capitalist system, which Marxist theory had always predicted. However, whereas according to the theory this was supposed to lead to communism, in not one single such Western society did communist regimes emerge. What did emerge in several of them was fascism. Some Marxists were disillusioned by this, to the point of abandoning Marxism. Others refused to question Marxist theory regardless of what actually happened. But there were many in between, people who remained or wanted to remain Marxists, but who felt that Marxism would have to be seriously re-examined if it was to continue to remain credible. One such group of people came together in Frankfurt in the late 1920s and have come to be known since as the Frankfurt School. Actually, they didn't stay in Frankfurt long, but the name was stuck. They left Germany in the early 1930s, in the period just before and after the Nazis came to power, and by the mid-30s, the key figures had all settled in the United States. These, to mention three, were Adorno, a man who seemed equally at home in philosophy, sociology, and music; Horkheimer, a philosopher come sociologist, less brilliant than Adorno, but perhaps more solid; and the one who has turned out in the end to be the most famous and influential of them all, the political theorist Herbert Marcuse. Their influence grew slowly, but grew nevertheless over a long period and reached a spectacular peak in the 1960s. Many things contributed to this. One was the powerful revisionist movement among Marxist and communist countries throughout Eastern Europe, culminating in the Prague Spring of 1968. This put the Frankfurt School in line for the first time with real-life developments inside the communist world. Another, obviously related, was the tremendous revival of interest in Marxism among people in the West, especially educated young people. This also culminated in 1968, the year which saw the high point of student violence all over Europe and the United States, and looked for a moment in Paris as if it might even come close to genuine revolution. The would-be revolutionaries of that day proclaimed one man more than others as their political mentor, and that was Marcuse. They painted the walls with phrases from his books in order to make it known to the world that they were going to turn his ideas into reality. And although the revolution didn't materialize, during the decades since then, the ideas of Marcuse and the Frankfurt School have come to dominate some of the social science departments in various countries in Europe, and through them to have a continued and very important influence on the young.
So that was in 1977. Come to dominate some of the departments. By today, all the humanities throughout Europe and the Western world are controlled by people from the Frankfurt School, their disciples, you might say. So there's an example here. This is one of the student leaders of the protests in 1968 in Germany. They failed, but then of course after that they try to think, why did we fail? They're so close to seizing power, but the establishment, de Gaulle went and asked the army on my side. They said yes, and so all these revolts and rebellions were repressed. So the students then, these young people, thought, well, what's the problem? The problem is the establishment don't agree with us. So this is what one of them, Rudi Deutschke, did I pronounce that correctly? Pretty good, thanks. He said, to extend the base of the student movement, Rudi Deutschke has proposed a strategy of the long march through the institutions, working against the established institutions while working within them. So he himself went and became one of the founders of the Green Party in Germany. They were very intelligent. They went back to universities. They got their PhDs, became lecturers and professors in the universities, and squeezed out other people. They went into the bureaucracies, the media, Hollywood. So we saw Paul Fry. Okay, where do you think Paul Fry was in 1968? That's the point. All the people that are running the whole country, the academic world, the political world, the civil service, all the bureaucracies, these are all the children, the young people who in 1968 tried to seize power, and since then have become involved and indoctrinated generation after generation afterwards. So that's why all these changes that are going through so incredibly quickly, gay marriage, gender fluidity, all these sorts of things, which have been accepted, and the whole thing being transformed so radically and so quickly, you might wonder, why is that happening? It's because the generation that is doing that, you might think these are old people, but all these old people, they grew up in the late 60s with these ideas. That make sense? So all these idiots, to be honest, in Oxford Circus, the only reason why they are there, where they have their head full of all these ideas about climate change, is because the people they're complaining about have introduced all those ideas into the school system over the last 30 years. That makes sense? It's not that the governments and things aren't doing anything, it's that these young people don't realize for the last 40 years the whole of our establishments has been transformed by these radical Marxist ideas, which is why they picked up all these radical Marxist ideas at schools, because that's all they've heard about at school, is climate change and everything. They didn't suddenly discover it. They've been indoctrinated at school to think this is really important and to go and do the things they're doing, and at the same time think nobody else will be doing anything.
You seem to be agreeing with Donald Trump.
I don't like Donald Trump. Very unpleasant person. I'm nothing, I don't. That's completely different. So this okay, all right, so this is the education, just 5 minutes, this is the education side. This is the book, 1968, I think. So it's a critique of pure tolerance. So the tolerance means you tolerate all sorts of different opinions and views. Okay, so they had a critique of pure tolerance, and Marcuse regarded tolerance as repressive, and this other person going beyond tolerance. So he said it's possible to identify policies, opinions, movements which would promote this chance of peace or whatever, and those which would do the opposite. Suppression of the regressive ones is a prerequisite for the strengthening of the progressive ones. In other words, when we look at the world in which we're living, there's lots of ideas. Some of these ideas, and we have a vision, some of these ideas that are circulating are supporting the vision we have. Some of the ideas which we are critique of the ideas that we support. So he said we need to eliminate, oppress, remove those ideas which are different to the ideas that we have. That make sense? It's about eliminating anyone who disagrees with you, not giving a platform or a voice to anyone who has a different point of view to yours or critiques you. Traditional liberal perspective is anybody can say anything, okay? That's the traditional liberal perspective. In practice, they have these things called no platform for racists and fascists. So you might think this is a new thing. When I was at University in Manchester in the early 1980s, you know, the student union, as student unions everywhere, were controlled by the left. And so myself and a couple of friends of mine, we were in CARP, and we started going around, you know, criticizing Marxism, criticizing the left and everything. So they didn't like us. And so they banned us. We said no platform for racists and fascists. So we were accused of being racist and fascist, which meant we were not allowed to take part in discussions or debates. Okay? So you might think, well, that's interesting. So you might wonder, who are these three people? Well, there's me, and there's a friend of mine from Jamaica, and another black British person. So the three of us, we were accused of being racist and fascists. The irony of it is amazing. Sorry?
One is the Jew.
I'm a Jew. I'm a Mooney. I'm in the minority of minorities. Yeah, I happen to be white. And my friend, he's, you know, as black as anything, from Jamaica, was living together in the same CARP center, and the other one is also of West Indian descent, also studying pharmacy. And there we were racist and fascist. So the point is, you just put a label upon somebody and then you can ban them, and then you don't have to pay any attention to their views and their voice. Oh, he's a racist and a fascist, therefore you don't need to listen to him. Don't take him seriously. He is not allowed to participate in the discussions.
Don't they say the same about Donald Trump?
Let's forget Donald Trump. And then you have safe spaces. Again, you're not allowed to criticize people, not allowed to be offensive. Restrictions on research, you're not allowed to do restrictions on speech, restrictions on reading lists, you know, so, you know, the university produced reading lists, and then if a book if you're on the reading list, you might get taken out of the library, so these books don't appear on the reading list, conservative books don't appear on reading lists. If a book isn't taken out within a certain time in a library, often it's just taken off the shelves. So gradually, all the conservative, alternative ways of looking at the world, they're all just being removed from the libraries, being removed from the shelves, because nobody takes them out, because nobody's ever heard of them, because lecturers, instead of giving, and you know, educating people, which means you give people a variety of points of view, they're only given, you know, one view.
In the name of tolerance.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to understand this, read 1984. So here's just a couple of examples. This is a recent survey. 8 in 10 university lecturers are left-wing. They self-identify as left-wing. The two that aren't. They're almost exclusively teaching in the natural sciences. Even asking questions are now transphobic. There was a surgeon who did surgery to change genders, and he ran a charity. He supported this idea, but he was very curious the fact that there were some people who wanted to get changed back again, and he wanted to do some research on that. So he applied to Bath University to a master's degree to do some research into people who had a gender change but then wanted to change back again. But he was told that asking the question or doing the research was in itself transphobic, and so he wasn't allowed to do the research. So that means he's no longer able to pursue uncomfortable questions and research at university. This year, the new NUS president has said that she wants to oppress white people and have an Islamic takeover in Britain. It's amazing. Has anybody accused her of being a racist and promoting hate speech? No, of course not, because it's okay to have those racist views. This is one of the most shocking things. Just a couple of weeks ago, one of the most notable philosophers in this country, he's old now, retired, Sir Roger Scruton, professor of aesthetics at London University for years. And then he's a political philosopher as well. And he lost his job because he said the word Islamophobia is invented by Muslim Brotherhood, which is true. And but it was not politically correct to say that the term Islamophobia was invented by the Islamic Brotherhood, by the Muslim Brotherhood, so as to protect and prevent criticism of Islam. So all these sorts of things are going on, affecting education. Yes.
The term of Islamophobia was invented at the beginning of 20th century by French, in the context of French Algeria.
Okay, I mean, it has different origins in different countries, but anyway, there's one book which traces its origin back to the Muslim Brotherhood, and they deliberately, more recently than the early 20th century, more recently they promoted this term, like anti-Semitism. They said, okay, that means it's very difficult to criticize Jews, let's create a term, Islamophobia, so we can say anybody who criticizes us and our practices can then be labeled an Islamophobe and a racist, and they can be shut down. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop there because that's just finally got into how it's starting to affect education. So there's no longer education now at schools or universities. It's not education, it's now indoctrination. You now have to believe certain things. If you don't believe those things, then you're regarded as a heretic. Yeah, it's a new heresy. Yeah?
In Lyon, where I live, we have a kind of scission between two universities. We are both doing a social science, but one is more categorized right, one other categorized left. And I studied in the one who is categorized left. I asked both, but I was accepted for this one. And it was funny to see that there are a lot of sometimes during the year, there are young communists came to give some tracts, to shout some things. But I wanted to know if in London there are also this kind of scissions between left-right universities. I mean, because in Lyon, it's a city where you can see still 2% who continue to go to churches and others continue to not go to churches.
No. I mean, in Britain today, even though many of the universities are religious foundations and they still have departments of theology and religious studies, predominantly the humanities are all liberal left.
Okay.
It's very rare to find anyone who's a conservative thinker, and even if you do find a conservative thinker, they usually keep their opinions to themselves. Because if you're a conservative thinker, then you won't get a job, basically.
Or won't have friends either.
It's just the way it is, I'm afraid.
One has to sip his things.
Yeah, if you criticize, there's no science anymore.
Right.
You can't investigate the scientific basis for the ideas of global warming anymore, because that in itself, you're accused of being a climate change denier or something. So the whole areas of science, and you can't investigate anymore because you can't challenge the consensus, the orthodoxy, in the humanities especially, but also in science. Anyway, we've got to stop now, it's 10:30. Sure. Sorry, go on.
Is it still available with questions?
Which we talk during the break?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, there'll be time for questions in the last session.
We still have time.
Well, there'll be time for question discussion. So we'll have a break, 20 minutes.
Yeah, before we break, I would like to take a photo.
Okay, where do you want to take it?
Maybe here, or
Okay.
if you guys have a proposal for a nice...
But we are supposed to have a train logo, yeah?
Outside,
No, you can Photoshop. You can Photoshop that in, can't you?